The Positive Pause is a motivational-minded podcast covering topics women want to know about as they journey to and through menopause, focusing on subjects that impact women's health and healthy aging, including what it means to age healthfully. The Positive Pause features experts and influencers from a variety of industries and specialties. The information and opinions expressed on the Positive Pause are not intended to replace the services of trained professionals or to provide specific medical advice. To see the National Menopause Foundation's full medical disclaimer, please visit nationalmenopausefoundation.org.
Welcome to the Positive Pause. I'm Claire Gill, founder of the National Menopause Foundation. Joining me today is Colleen McIntosh, author of Menopause, the horror, humility, and humor of it all. Colleen started her career as an actress, performing on multiple continents. She then moved on to advertising, where she dedicated most of her professional life. Upon retirement, she set out to write an autobiographical book about her menopause journey, realizing that sharing her experience could help others going through this stage of life. Colleen has helped elevate the conversation around menopause and aging without shame, never holding back, and always with humor. She believes that humor is the essence of life, right up there with breathing. She could not have made it through menopause without it, and she hopes her book will help people sit up and pay attention to every woman they know and meet. Thanks so much for joining me today, Colleen.
Oh, thank you, Claire. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I think it could not be a better time to talk about finding humor in the most difficult of situations, as we were talking about, and as we are going through the difficult changes and stages that we're having as a country. But you talked to me earlier when we first met about your interest in writing and that you always wanted to do that. So what made you decide to finally write a book, and why did you choose menopause specifically?
Well, prior to menopause, I always dabbled in writing, and I always kept a journal, a diary throughout most of my life and into my adult life. And I tried a couple of romance novels just for fun, and then a couple of plays since I was an actress. I have a couple of great ideas. But when I hit menopause in my 40s, I became kind of obsessed with changes in my life and my body and my mind. And I kind of abandoned all of those other book ventures and decided to start a journal cataloging all of my symptoms and what I called mutations, because they were occurring almost daily, so it seemed. But I became so obsessed with menopause because I knew almost nothing about it.
Mm-hmm.
I knew the word menopause, and I knew that meant losing your period and the ability to procreate, along with maybe some hot flashes.
Yeah.
And that's basically the extent of my knowledge. I also realized that no woman in my family or in my circle of friends ever talked about menopause, and I couldn't understand why.
Yeah.
Like, why are we talking about this? I'll talk about any bodily function. I continued jotting down all these changes, and this stack of notebooks started just like creeping up and up and up, little scraps of paper and there. And this was kind of approaching turning 50. And then I continued writing. I went through my menopause decade really in my 40s, but you're still in menopause like in my 50s. So I was noting all the changes of my aging body right up until I wrote the book in my early 60s. But I mentioned in the exact moment in my book when I had this kind of like epiphany about writing this particular book about menopause. I was traveling up to northern Maine and had a long layover in the airport. I was sitting at a bar, and the 13-year-old bartender was ignoring me, and he was only waiting on the men. And I sat there and I got more and more irritated and angry. And I was so sick and tired of being invisible everywhere I went. So I grabbed the notebook out of my bag, because I always carried a notebook, and I plunked it down at the bar, and I just started outlining the book. Like, okay, this is what I want to write about. And I had all these notes, but I just literally just pages and pages. And by the time I got up to Northern Maine, I had started basically writing the book. And I found that menopause was such a difficult phase for me. And I was so tired of doing it alone. I mean, I really feel everyone deserves support, especially during stages like this. And I was tired of being dismissed and treated like I was irrelevant, and wanted to share my story about this change of life that half the world's population goes through. I found it was unacceptable that this topic was never discussed. It was swept under the rug. And as I say in my book, and then we'd have to vacuum it up.
That's right. That's right.
And so menopause became my primary focus, and I felt a responsibility to write about my personal journey.
Well, thank goodness you did, because we do. We need more people talking about it. And so I also love, again, the idea of weaving humor into it.
Yes.
It's not that the change of life and the experience or the symptoms that women may have are not serious and can be really debilitating and terrible, but we have to find some humor in it. So you shared in the book that humor saved you as you were going through that. So talk a little bit about how you were able to use humor to get through it all.
Yeah. Well, there's an example. When I finally reached Northern Maine, which took all day, I was at my niece's house, and I was surrounded by family and friends, all ages and genders. And I'll back up a little. My family, I've always been dramatic. I was an actress, and my family always expects me to perform.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm the one that performs. So somebody asked me what I was doing, how I was doing, what I was doing. And I just opened my mouth and a monologue came out of my menopausal journey, and I didn't hold back. And one of the stories I told, I said, when my husband and I want to get amorous and we're laying there and I spread my thighs and out roll the tumbling tumbleweeds, my vagina. I said, I call it the arid desert. And I just went on and on. I never shut up. I was like vomiting from the mouth, and they couldn't shut me up, but they were all laughing so hard. And some were shocked. I have to say, some were pretty horrified, but it became so funny that I realized that if I write this story, I have to write it with humor, because I equate it to, because this happened, going to a funeral or a wake and sitting there, and whoever you're sitting with, all of a sudden you have like a fit of giggles.
Oh, yeah.
Like you can't stop.
Yep.
I mean, your whole body's shaking. You're laughing so hard. It's not being disrespectful to whatever the person or menopause. It is actually being cathartic.
So true.
It's getting you through a difficult situation. So I feel it's okay to laugh about it, because otherwise, I have to say, if you're not laughing, you're crying. But I also decided each chapter should have a picture to go with it. So I did my own illustrations because I couldn't get any family member to do it, that are actually artists. They wouldn't do it. They were men. They were horrified. So I wanted a funny avatar, Colleen, kind of in a funny whatever, to explain about the chapter, to go along with the chapter that I was writing. So that was important that I have cartoons in there. And I also, in my blogs, I make sure that every topic, which, I continue the conversation about menopause and I talk about the aging journey women go through, but it has to have humor to go with it because you're talking about really kind of traumatic moments in your life. But how do you get through it?
Yeah, it really is. Well, I'm also a fan of that saying that the best tears are tears that come from laughter, right?
Yeah.
You're laughing so hard, you're crying. I would much prefer that to actually crying. And you're right. It's so cathartic when you get to that point. And sometimes the absurdity of what's happening to us or what's going on around us or how people are responding to it is truly funny because it's not what you expect. And having a little dose of humor on all of that makes perfect sense. I love you talking about the fact that your family thinks you constantly need to perform. I know so many friends who are in the acting and comedy. And yeah, it's like every conversation is a bit, like what's going to happen is they're working on their routine. And I love it though, because it does make you look at all of that in a different way.
Yeah.
How to be humorous about it. I remember complaining when I got diagnosed with a chronic disease, and at the time, the treatment was that I had to give myself shots. And I was really stressed about it, and I didn't want to do it. And I was complaining about it to one of my friends, and his response was, heroin addicts shoot up every day, and I consider you a step above the average heroin addict. So suck it up and take your medicine. I laughed so hard, really, right? It was like the perfect way to jump me out of my self-pity. And I remember saying that to my neurologist at the time when I explained to him, well, I was kind of hesitant, but this is what my friend said. And he stopped and looked at me and he said, "This is what your friends say?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You're going to be just fine. You're going to be great." Because, right, we looked at it with that humor of it, right? Just taking the pain and shock of it and then saying, okay, right, let's just get over this and move on. So I love that that's how you approach it as well, because we need to do that throughout life,
Yeah, we do. We do.
Talking about that. And it's also important, like, that, you do it in front of the male members of your family, right? So you talk about the fact that you really meant this book to be shared. So
I did.
people needed to understand. So what was your husband's reaction, I have to say, to ask about you writing a book about your menopausal experience?
Well, my husband, what's funny is, he lives with me. He knows that I will talk about anything and everything. Going to the bathroom, I have no problem talking about the result of that trip. It's like, why do you need to share so much?
Yeah.
But I do remember when he read the book, when I was beta testing it, he went into the office and he closed the door. When he finished, he came out and I was like, "So, what'd you think?" And he goes, "Well," and he started giving me critiques on, like, "I think you made a grammatical error here and blah, blah." I'm going, "That's what you're taking."
Yeah, that's it.
I said, "Did you laugh at all? Did you, were you shocked?" "What?" He goes, "No, I thought it was funny." And I said, "You have no problem with your parts in this book?" And he was like, no, I think it was okay.
Well, like you said, he's had enough time to get used to you. So I guess he wasn't surprised in how you do it. But we talk about the importance of that, of having those conversations that aren't easy with the people in our families that we love. And a couple reasons for that too. And the importance of that. I remember someone telling me, and I think I shared this with you when the first time we met, that when I was starting the Menopause Foundation, a friend shared with me that she was talking to a friend about it. And that woman said that one of her biggest regrets was her son was going off to college and they had this great relationship all through his life. But then when
Right.
she hit menopause, she never explained or talked about what was happening to her. And she was struggling so much with the symptoms, and it really impacted her relationship
Mm-hmm.
with her son. And now he was going off to college, and she felt that. And I thought, oh my God, that's so sad, right? That women don't feel we can have these conversations or talk about what the struggle is and the impact it has on relationships. And so maybe if people approach it with a little bit of humor, that makes it a little bit easier for people to join the conversation and join the, again, not laughing at what's happening to us, but laughing about some of the absurdity of it all and how we experience those things. And certainly for our girlfriends, having those conversations and opening up and being like, oh my God, you won't believe what just happened to me. It is truly, truly fun. So you do get a little serious though in the book where you were talking about that you were a little disappointed in your mom's lack of feminine compassion when you were going through puberty and you got your first period. And so given that you started menopause, your menopausal symptoms, you were, as I said, you were early 40s. That's a little bit,
41.
that's early, What do you think about having those conversations with teen daughters about menopause while we're talking about puberty?
That's a great question. Yes, absolutely. I would have appreciated a conversation with my mom about periods and menopause. I essentially was flying solo during my menopause years. I'm OCD, so that knowledge would have saved me a tremendous amount of mental and emotional anguish. If I'd known in advance, I probably would have treated the whole situation differently than I did. But I see no issue whatsoever with discussing periods with your tweens, teens, daughters, because probably a lot of times that mom who has a tween teen daughter might be going through perimenopause, possibly timing wise, might work out. So why wouldn't you take this perfect opportunity to educate them not only on periods, but also what you're going through, which is something they will eventually be going through? And that way, actually, both of you are getting the support you need at these pivotal moments.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is. And maybe that's what we go about it. And until we get around to including menopause in the conversations that children have at school about puberty, because we talk about why we learn about puberty and then they don't say anything except for the one school in Northern Virginia that my daughter goes to, because she learned about menopause before she learned about puberty. When we were talking about it at the dinner table about me starting this foundation, and then I had to explain what menopause was. And then when they started studying puberty in class, she raised her hand and said, oh, and at the end for women, it's menopause. So I guess, it's so I'm crazy that we talk about the start of fertility with people and we don't explain that it ends for women, right? And
Correct.
that just, again, is another example of how, right, it's just so backwards. We only talk about the reproductive part, not the end part. But you're right. It's kind of incumbent upon us then as women to teach our daughters the beginning and the end. And you say, if you're going through it, to be able to share that this is what's happening, guys, we're preparing a whole generation of younger women to know, wow, this is what's going to happen towards the end. And don't be worried about it, right? Yeah. It's just a natural phase and you're going to get through it just the way you're getting through puberty.
Yes. And telling them some of the symptoms that potentially will happen are helpful. I knew about hot flashes.
That's so important.
But I didn't know about mood swings.
Nobody does. We don't know about all of the symptoms, right?
Or how it affects your sexual life with your partner. A lot of changes occur.
A lot of changes. And if you don't talk about them, then you can't address them. And I think, unfortunately, since there's not clinical or healthcare provider help for women at menopause, when we don't have enough healthcare providers who understand women's health and what happens, then there's no one to kind of share that with. And so the more those of us who've been through it can give a synopsis of it and then talk about what those treatments and benefits are, we're not going to make the difference in the change that we need to see at this stage of life. You're also really open in the book, Colleen, and I love this about the fact that depression played a role within your menopausal journey too, and that it took a while for you to kind of get that under control and realizing, oh, this is being amplified, but I'm going through, right?
Oh, it was horrible. My 40s were a huge, massive time of change. I had a new marriage, a new job, a new home as I was going through the beginning stages of hot flashes and mood swings and lack of sleep and brain fog and the whole thing. This primary decade basically took me down what I called a deep rabbit hole that I gained 26 pounds. I stopped exercising. I ate poorly. I slept poorly. I was miserable and angry, scared and confused. I did try therapy, but I picked the wrong therapist. So there's a year and a half gone. Actually, it was a dark phase where I actually didn't have a lot of humor. I just was a very unhappy person. But as I approached my 50s, I had another epiphany that I decided to get my body and my mind in order and take control of my life. And most importantly, get my soul back. What makes Colleen Colleen? And what I did, here's where OCD helped me. My OCD, I fully committed to change my life. I learned transcendental meditation, and which I practiced morning and evening. I searched and found an exercise program that fit my schedule and motivated me, which was Pilates with yoga. And I worked out at home. I had no excuses not to work out. I don't want to get in the car today, I'm so tired, No, I had no excuses. Oh, and I also did in the morning after my meditation, I did like a 15-minute workout just to wake up my body. And it really, really just woke me up and rejuvenated my whole kind of day, kind of set my day in motion, as opposed to being tired and just drinking 10 gallons of coffee. I changed my diet to eating very healthy and eliminating, like processed foods and saturated fats. And I kept maintaining my journal as well, which was important, my menopause journal. And it didn't take a tremendous long time with my dedication to maintaining this routine. I lost 30 pounds. I felt healthy. I was alert. I slept better. I built up my strength and my confidence. I was much happier. And my thing is, you have to fully commit and selfishly maintain this routine until you've stabilized and incorporated this into your everyday work and family schedule. You're not taking a ton of time away. This was like an hour and a half out of my day total between meditation and working out. That's not a lot of time.
Right.
And my thing is, I really feel that, like, my husband, the hour and a half, taking that time away from my husband or my pets, my fur balls, they gradually incorporated this into their schedule as well to allow me to be a happier individual. And I know women are really great at multitasking. We're like super multitaskers, but some of that juggling should be for selfish reasons. Sometimes you need to be a little selfish. That's okay, because ultimately everyone in the household is going to be happier by you being happier.
Yeah, but you know what? It's so weird. I think we have to change the vernacular of like being selfish, right? For taking any time, never mind an hour and a half, right? Out of a 24-hour cycle, you spent an hour and a half focused on you, and all of a sudden that's considered selfish. That's the kind of thing that is so put on us as women. And I've been talking about, all the time, and people know on the podcast, I talk about all the priorities and how we prioritize everybody and we don't prioritize ourselves, right? We have these lists of things and, it feels selfish to prioritize yourself. And someone had said to me, we'd be good if we just remember to put ourselves on the list, never mind being the priority on the list.
Yeah, I'm not saying
women, we don't even put ourselves on the list.
I know.
And so we need to do more of that and get away from this idea that it was selfish. And as you said, you being happier, healthier, all of those things ended up benefiting your husband and your family, right?
Correct.
It's crazy. It's crazy that we think that that's selfishness. So anyway, maybe it's good, right? We all need to be a little more selfish about how we go about that. And I also like your story and that one that you were so willing to share it in the book, because I think the mental health challenges of midlife are something that we definitely don't talk about.
No.
Whether or not it's a symptom of menopause, and for many women it is, the little science we know about women and menopause is, again, if you've experienced depression or anxiety, that it might become, and you're treating it well, it might pick up at midlife. And then for women who have never experienced these things, it might start during menopause as your hormones are adjusting and things like that. And so talking about the fact that that's normal, right? That it's okay. You're not alone. Right. And it's okay to get help for it and figure it out is really, really important. And you do that with humor, which is so terrific too, like being able to talk about it and laugh about, I know the same thing where I'm screaming at my husband and daughter to pick up after themselves. It's funny with other women, right? Everyone knows what I'm talking about. They're like, oh yeah, maybe not so funny to my husband and daughter, but to friends, female friends, it's hysterical because we've all done it. And again, when you start to hear that everybody does it and has those moments, you realize, oh, okay, I'm not actually losing my mind. I'm just going through a moment. And that's good.
Exactly. Because what I suffered during my 40s, I'm not having in my 60s.
Yeah.
It's not like the mood swings aren't what they used to be. I'm not having the hot flash. Occasionally at night, I might, a little hot flash, but it's not the same as it was, because when you know nothing about it and you're going through these just bizarre, your body is just shifting, changing. Your brain is confused by all of this, and it is also shifting and changing. And you have nobody to talk to. That's how you feel. You have nobody to talk to. It does get better. I will say that. But there are other things that occur to you as you get older that you weren't expecting either. This whole transition into being a senior is just another shock to your system. And I don't see the other half of the population, the men, going through what we're going through. But they need to know that throughout this whole process of each phase of life, you have to understand and be supportive.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's the kind of thing too that we don't talk about either enough when we talk about this transition and the symptoms of menopause and all of this kind of stuff. And there's always such a negative connotation to it. And I try to remind myself to share with younger women. I'm like, it's also awesome. This stage of life is amazing. So don't fret it, and you're talking about the same thing. You transition to the senior and you're kind of surprised you're here, but then you're the happiest you've been in ages.
Yeah. It does change. It does get better, hopefully. But you know what? If you're having a hard time, it's also okay to get a therapist. My therapy with menopause was writing and this and that. However, I do want to say that nowadays there are, let's put it this way, other alternatives that we didn't have, or I didn't have when I was going through it in my 40s. There are some things helping women with hot flashes and things like that. I think there are more medical practitioners that are learning about menopause. Not as many as I wish there were, but more than when I was going through it. And also, getting a good therapist is also helpful. Somebody to talk to that will listen to you because you're paying them to listen to you. And hopefully they have good advice. If you can find a good therapist, that's also very helpful.
Yeah, we need to normalize that too. Like you said, having those conversations and finding your people, right? Who you can talk to when you need to. But
Yes.
like you said, there's times where you need a professional to sort of help you drill down into what's happening. And I think we all have friends who are good therapists, but they're people too, and they aren't going to be able to give us the feedback that we might need that a professional therapist could.
Yeah.
So, it's finding what's right for you. Yep. And just knowing that it's not selfish and it's not that, anything's wrong. Getting yourself what you need is so, so important at every stage of life. So, Colleen, just like, what's one thing that you would want every woman to know about the menopausal journey, about how to approach it, I guess?
Well, we've talked about this already. You are not alone. Know that you are not alone. You don't really have to deal with this all by yourself. I think getting a good menopause medical practitioner is probably key now. And like I said, a therapist. But I also want to say that the resources now that weren't available when I was going through menopause, like the National Menopause Foundation, which you have created this phenomenal, safe, and supportive space for women to come and learn about this transition. This community of support is vital during menopause, and taking advantage of this wealth of information on your site is just beyond fantastic. I can't thank you enough for creating this foundation. Another important thing I really feel is finding a support system that is also readily available. And when I quit my job in my early 60s, I immediately found a support system just walking outside my door. The women on my street, all ages, with kids, without kids, we found a community together. And I'm the menopause person. I'm the one that talks about menopause and educates all the younger women, and the older women laugh. But we get together once a month, and we also have a group text. So if we're having a bad day, we just text it out to the women, and immediate response comes in to support you. It's as easy as walking down the street here. So get to know your neighbors, get to know people close by you. one of the most important things is to be kind to yourself. Stop apologizing. Never lose your sense of humor. Laughter is the best medicine, as they say. And in my book, I say, give yourself a little menopause. You know, pat yourself on the back for just surviving.
That's great. That's so great. Thank you so much, Colleen, for joining me and talking about your personal story. And we'll include additional information and resources about you in the book in the notes with this episode. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have. If so, please subscribe to the Positive Pause podcast so you never miss an episode. And please share information about this podcast with your family and friends. Thanks again to my guest, Colleen McIntosh, author of Menopause, The Horror, Humility, and Humor of It All. And thank you for listening. We hope you'll tune into another episode of The Positive Pause.